Welcome. I'm Sam Faddis. This is Ground Truth, and we're going to be talking today about the ongoing riots in the country and really the question of how it's possible that we could have unrest on this scale inside our own country and be caught by surprise by it. Isn't somebody supposed to be paying attention to that kind of thing? And with us to help illuminate those issues, a friend of the show, an old colleague, former CIA officer kind of guy who's been there, done that in the field everywhere. John Maguire. John, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Good to be here.
So look, let me just frame this. I mean, you and I were just talking before we went live with this thing. Frame the issue, if you will, which is you have this killing of George Floyd, which I think every right-thinking American finds horrifying and frankly boggling. I've watched every video of that and just still don't even really. I mean, I understand what I'm seeing. I just don't understand how it's possible. I especially don't understand how there are three other cops watching this go on. I think that the whole nation has this feeling that something very wrong happened here, and I think the whole nation generally is in favor of the concept of peaceful protesting. I've engaged in a few myself in my time. But what we're seeing right now is something dramatically different. We're seeing violence. We are seeing anarchy. We're seeing something that is clearly coordinated, directed, planned, involving thousands of people coast to coast, every nation, every city in the nation. And all of this happened very quickly. I mean, the time it took between George Floyd being killed and the country going up in flames is effectively no time. And we're seeing, instruction sheets that people are finding that are handed out to these Antifa people, telling them precisely how to operate. We see that they've all been issued prepaid cell phones purchased by somebody. They have instructions on communication. They have instructions on maintaining compartmentation. We've got all these reports of pre-positioned pallets of bricks and flammable liquids, and just on and on and on. We see that there's this huge organization, the kind of thing you don't see George Floyd get killed and then say, hey, let's go build this thing. This is the product, as you and I both know, of years of preparation and then looking for the excuse to touch it off. And somehow or another, even though all this is going on inside our country, we apparently have no knowledge that it's happening and no warning. We are completely taken by surprise. Now, we have a Federal Bureau of Investigation, and one of their functions, in addition to investigating crimes that already occurred, is intelligence collection inside the United States. So with that preamble, I'm posing the question to you. How is that possible that can happen, that we can be completely blind to all of this?
Sam, that's a great question. And when you look at what's been going on for the last several years, this didn't come as an instant surprise, you're right. There's clear evidence of logistics, payroll, and organization that's nationwide. People are able to react extremely fast to capitalize on the shock of an incident somewhere, whatever that incident is. The police conduct in Minneapolis, the first thing that comes to mind, having been a police officer before I was in the agency, was the importance of frontline supervisors and competence in the command staff, because the department is basically going to be a reflection of what the leadership apparatus looks like and how they perform. And it's quite evident that is sorely lacking in Minneapolis, and they're not unique to that. There's departments around the country that are struggling. We have the blessing of seeing two extremes. We have some horrible things going on in a place like Minneapolis with that murder of that guy on the street for 8 minutes of video, which is breathtaking to me as a former cop, that no one with him did anything about his activities in broad daylight. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have NYPD in New York, which is arguably the best police department in the world, the best led department, the best trained department, and the most accountable department. certainly in the United States, they're monitored and examined and scrutinized and drilled into constantly. And they have set up mechanisms to manage data, manage their people, and manage problems. But as you look at where is the system breaking down, it breaks down in leadership positions and your frontline command. When you looked at the video from New York, all those guys out there in white shirts are bosses. All the guys in blue are in uniform. Those are uniformed officers. But the guys in white shirts are command officers. And you've got command officers visible everywhere. And in a lot of these other videos that you see, and granted, that's a one-dimensional shot. You get, 5 seconds of video. But you're looking around like, well, who's in charge of this thing? Because I've seen the use of gas on TV, and you look at how they're employing gas, what kind of gas they're using. And for my takeaway on a lot of it was we're not ready for this because there doesn't seem to be a strategy that's planned, practiced, and executed going on. You're not seeing that. You're seeing reaction, and in many cases, poor reaction. But they're up against something that has planned for this and studied this. That's the thing that I find shocking, because they have picked apart the weaknesses of our system, the logistical weaknesses that we have, our communication weaknesses that structurally affect every police department in the country. There are geography issues. When one of the things I was amazed at, I did an exchange thing with LAPD years ago, coming from Baltimore and then going to Los Angeles and seeing how they police in Los Angeles when they're operating in a city that's 60 miles by 90 miles. And I was stunned at just the mere geographical challenges that they face to just get there, given the traffic problems that they have. So every city is different, but it all comes back to that leadership, frontline leadership on the street, and who gets promoted. And when you don't promote people for competence and people who have mastered the craft of police work and know how to lead armed men on directed activities and get results with it, you have this breakdown that we're witnessing all over the place. But this is a product, I think, of foolishness and social engineering experimentation over the years with policing and community relations that have just gotten us so far afield that the confidence in the public is gone. And for good reason. The public feels victimized and they're tired of it. And it's venting right now, but then we have the exploitation piece that's really dangerous with these radical groups.
Well, so you have these challenges for the police, and those, I mean, you've done that job, as you said before you got in the agency, and I don't. That's a tough job. I mean, that's an incredibly tough job. You have all of that, but then you have, I guess in my mind, I think, okay, but let's roll the tape back, right? If you and I were we have a little bit of knowledge, more than the average bear, about covert action, setting up cells, compartmentation, maintaining secrecy, covert communications, avoiding detection. If you were going to set up an apparatus that has the capacity to, within 24 hours, set fire to every major city in the United States, deliver pallets of bricks to the street, hand out prepaid cell phones, procure the prepaid cell phones with cash that came from somewhere, then hand them out. Okay, that's years of effort and thousands of meetings and thousands of emails and telephone calls, all occurring within the confines of the continental United States. Now, I don't really necessarily say that the Minneapolis Police Department is charged with that, although you would think they'd know something's going on in their own city. But the FBI is our domestic intelligence collection organization. We don't have an MI5 like the Brits do. The FBI has defended that turf vigorously in the past. That's their shtick. That's what they're supposed to do. Yet somehow all of this preparation went on under our noses. And it wasn't until the country catches on fire that we're aware. And I'll take it even a step further. Okay. Day 2, day 3, day 4, whatever day we're on now. if you had an intelligence apparatus, you would be overnight knocking in doors and picking up all of the ringleaders of all this, all the guys who are pulling the strings. Yet I don't see any evidence that any of that is going on either. Telling me that apparently, I mean, we're picking up guys for breaking store windows, which we should, but the leadership apparently is still intact because this thing is still running. So it's not just we were blind in advance. Apparently we're still completely blind. Is that where we are? We still don't really know who's running this thing?
That's a great question, and I feel the same way you do about it. It's not there's no acceptable explanation out there on why this is happening and why it wasn't in some way preempted. It's not because the Bureau doesn't have the ability to do this. I watched them do it in my early career in a police department with the Klan. They picked the Klan apart. They picked organized crime apart, and they eventually destroyed, in large measure, both organizations. So there's not an excuse that, well, we don't know how to do this. It has to be the other part of we're not doing this because the leadership system is not focusing people, resources, and investigative will against this problem. And I shudder to think what the Attorney General guidelines look like under the Obama administration and what the FBI's operating manual may have looked like from that. You hear rumors about that. I heard rumors like that when I was still in the agency about their views of Islamic radical activities in the United States. But there's not an excuse that's acceptable for not being able. If you can't preempt it, we're always going to be surprised somewhere. But the first surprise should turn the machinery on. And there's people on video that are crystal clear that there's a sequenced event planned that goes on. A guy will show up in black clothes with tools or instruments to pry doors open, break tempered glass, and get an access point to a business. And then the looters are just people. There's a lot of people mixed in that are just opportunists. People forget we've been under the pandemic. Folks in the cities are broke. We have all these programs, the SBA and all this stuff that everybody's talking about, but where the rubber meets the road, the average person is penniless now after 3 months of the pandemic. They have no money. And they're looking at foreclosures on mortgages. They're looking at car repossessions. They haven't paid their insurance bills. And then there's a lot of people that are just out of work and have no benefit structure at all, and they have nothing. So you've got looters that are available, and then they go in the store, clean the place out, and then another part of it looks to me like the apparatus that is set up to do this and organize and guide this shows up with flammable liquids or incendiary tools and goes in and lights the place on fire. And then that operational plan, the way you and I used to do things, the full sequence of the ops plan is then executed and the building burns down and they move on to the next target. That's going on in cities everywhere. And that's what stunned me watching this is, man, who's in charge of all this and who's funded this and why can't we find the money? If you're passing out money and these people are not sleeping on the street, they're sleeping in hotels somewhere.
Yep.
Somebody's paying for all this. They have to buy gas. The rental car thing, the one thing that I saw about renting vans, the big 12-passenger vans, and if you have a dozen of those, you can move a company-sized unit fast. And I'm watching this stuff go on thinking they know where our gaps are. And you look at California because of the vastness of the state, just the geography alone, they can outrun the police capacity to redeploy and solve a problem that's now 40 miles out of one division in another division. And somebody is paying for that. It's not cheap to put logistics stuff in place. I mean, again, this is not an overwhelmingly expensive activity because you have willing participants. But there is payroll. There's money being paid for bail. There's money being paid for food. People have to eat. So there's cash being passed out. I don't understand why we can't find that. Find the money and file the money. I mean, that's not rocket science. It's a basic investigative tool. But we've been at this now for 7 days, I guess. And we don't seem to be catching up. I don't see You're not hearing about arrests. Maybe they're arresting people, but it's not getting out in the media, and they're not reporting on the horrific events that are going on. That stuff is being screened. It looks like to me. There was a piece on the first that Tucker Carlson did, just a summary of events that have happened and people that have been hurt. And he put the video on. He censored a lot of the video, but it even censored. It was breathtakingly ugly on what is happening in these towns around the United States. But you don't see the commensurate response to this, and that is frightening. And it scares people. People are afraid. I talk to members of my family that are in other parts of the country, and they're very worried about this because there seems to be a level of lawlessness that is permeating the country, and they don't see a reaction or competence in the reaction that comes from the political leaders who are largely silent in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about is really an insurrection, almost a revolution that is going on across the entire nation. And again, this is not to minimize the wrong done to George Floyd. It is not to say that protesting peacefully should be prevented. That's not at all what we're talking about. We're talking about this organized activity. You know, Andy Ngo, who is famous for covering Antifa out in Portland, has written a number of pieces recently saying basically, look, I've been telling you for years what I see in Portland and how organized these guys are and what their intentions are. And basically, nobody's been paying attention to me. And now what you're seeing is the exact same methodology in every city across the country. And he described exactly what you just touched on. They've got this business of looting, if you will, down to a science. Folks show up. They're typically not from the area. They've got their instructions. They're working in pairs. They break a store, break windows, instigate the crowd. Okay, then bystanders get sucked into the looting. And then literally there are designated people that come along with flammable liquids and set the place on fire. And they have, down to the point of carrying backpacks with cans of spray paint, and they have pre-designated graffiti that they put up on the walls. You can see them in the videos walking along. You know, it takes them like 3/4 of a second to spray paint the graffiti because they've spray painted the exact same message 1,000 times by this point. But, you know, back to what you were just saying. Okay, so all those people were brought in. First of all, they were recruited. They were trained. They were brought in. Somebody paid for the bricks, the flammable liquids, vans, hotel rooms, all of this stuff. At this point, certainly we ought to be able to unravel that and go find the ringleaders. But my God, how does an organization of that size grow inside the United States over what has to be years? And the Bureau's blind to that. And I mean, I've reached the same conclusion that you've reached, apparently, which is, well, look, you've seen the Bureau knows how to do this. As you said, they tore the KKK apart. They've torn the Aryan nations apart. They've torn the mob apart. If they're not doing this, it's because basically they're being prevented, I would say, for political reasons. And you made reference to this operations manual. I started looking at the thing the other day after I talked to an old FBI colleague of mine. Good God, when I started going through their manual of requirements to recruit sources, I thought, well, this is in effect makes it impossible to recruit sources. I mean, it's a rule book it's not funny. It's not funny, but it's just like you and I both know how difficult it is to recruit sources anyway. And we had our own hoops to jump through. But God, they are nothing compared to these guys. I mean, this is recruiting sources by not just by committee, but by a whole succession of committees with lawyers looking over your shoulder. And as this FBI guy said that I was talking to, and you got to run all of this through DOJ, and all of their lawyers at this point are completely politically opposed to you penetrating any leftist organization. So good luck. In fact, this guy said to me, I asked him off the record, guesstimate for me. He's now retired, so this is his guesstimation. How many sources do you think we got inside the whole Antifa apparatus nationwide? And effectively what he said was, if we're lucky, 5 in the whole country. That's what he said to me.
a terrifying thought. It really is.
Just,
I
I
mean, the
mean,
big clue just a couple of years ago was the mess that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. That should have been the wake up call on the federal level if they had been asleep until then. That this is a serious issue, and a kid was killed out there.
yep.
But here we are, fast forward to today. Now it's nationwide, and we're running to catch up. And police departments over the years, I'm sure in the last previous administration, they had their intelligence divisions wings clipped. I know what went on in Baltimore. They were disassembled, and they had a great intelligence unit in that department for years. NYPD has an extraordinary good intelligence division, but they've been focused on foreign terrorism threats that have taken the lives of more than anything else in New York City with the attacks. But it all comes back to that factor of leadership and the actual national will to do something. And I agree with you. I think the Bureau's just been turned off on this. They're not doing it.
Yeah,
And now we're paying for it with billions of dollars of property damage.
I think that this, your point that it's not just the Bureau here, that it's intel units across the country is dead on. I mean, Baltimore, where that you know very well, and I've lived in off and on big chunks of my life. Now they're obsessed with flying a plane around over West Baltimore to help them interdict drug activity.
Yeah.
Well, but Baltimore's not a very big town, and if you take the area they're talking about, West Baltimore, Sandtown, those areas, even smaller, and you're like, okay, why don't? What do you mean? You don't effectively. What that says to me is you don't know anything about what's actually happening on the street out there until you show up and find a body. You don't have any sources. You don't have any snitches. You don't have an intel unit. So you're reduced to taking pictures from a plane to try to guess who's moving drugs in West Baltimore. How is that possible? I mean, that just means you had to shut down your apparatus because you want to have snitches on every street corner, telling you what's going on. And I suspect once upon a time that was true.
That was exactly how it used to work. And the uniformed officers were the first frontline layer, the patrol officers for each precinct or division or whatever it's called, or districts. And then the next line was the detectives that were assigned in that specific district, and they had their own CIs and their own investigative tools that they used. And then there was a larger piece, an overlay that came from headquarters. For a lot of that was related to resources or money that you might need to do something. And then there was a group of people that just did warrant applications and Title III applications. We had like a wizard room of people that could sit down and pound out a warrant application to get a Title III wiretap going on these people, and then you were off and running. But the machinery was well oiled. But it comes back to that original point I made of there was a leadership cadre that really knew what they were doing, and there was a will to prevent crime and interdict things before they became like a full-blown 5-alarm fire. If you could preempt it and prevent that from happening, that's a success. And you look at cities like Baltimore, they had the last riots they had, the most recent riots, was the Freddie Gray thing that happened. And when the mayor made her comment, give them room to destroy, it created a huge problem within the insurance industry because there's a social contract that a government, a sovereign government of a state or a city or the federal government has with the private enterprise system and society that we all live in. And that social contract is the protection of life, liberty, and property. Property is part of it. And when you tell the police to step back and give these people room to destroy, that canceled the insurance coverage. And that's why I don't think this is talked about much, but I don't think very much money was paid out yet in Baltimore for insurance payments. I think when you say that, you're going to end up in court because the insurance company's not going to pay for something when there was no effort to save the property. You have to at least try, and maybe it doesn't work, but there has to be an effort to prevent total destruction of a business. And that's not happening in a lot of these cities right now. People are doing whatever they want to do, and they're burning stuff down, and they're saying things that are going to come back. When the political leader says, I want a light touch, like de Blasio said, a light touch, what does that mean? It sounds good in a soundbite on some goofy media talking head, but when you're on the street with your helmet on thinking, well, what's a light touch? The guy just hit my supervisor in the head with a brick, like that incident in New York City over the last couple of days. And they're calling to fire the officer before they know anything. And yet in a different frame, you see if the guy in the white shirt who was a boss did not have a helmet on, he, in all likelihood, he would have been killed. If you hit somebody in the back of the head with a brick, that's a fatal attack. Could be a fatal attack. And that officer had every right to shoot that guy with the brick, but he didn't. He held his fire and showed restraint because producing his firearm, whatever happened outside the frame, diffused it, and he didn't fire. But legally, could he have fired to prevent what could be a lethal assault on a fellow officer? Sure. But police are showing breathtaking restraint in the midst of this chaos, and the American public doesn't know anything about this. They have no understanding of police procedural manuals. They just jump up and down and say, well, we want him charged. We want him charged with first-degree murder. They have no idea how any of this works because, that's not – we don't teach civics classes anymore on how the United States actually exercises and implements the Constitution. But that's a whole nother topic to talk about.
Well, I mean, if you got to think if you're the average cop in one of these cities where you got the mayor basically – anytime there's any question, the default is to blame the police, hang you out to dry. Well, real fast, the rank and file is going to be, look, I got a wife and kids at home, or husband and kids at home, and I'm not, you don't have my back. Well, then I'm sorry. I'm not going to be a martyr here. I'm not going out and charging this crowd and doing the right thing. It's like that police precinct in Minneapolis where the cops were put under siege and there were police officers inside and people attacking them and burning the building down. And ultimately, what do? They basically walk out the back door, let the precinct burn, right? I mean, there's no question. We're not using lethal force. We probably have justification 500 times over. But I'm not shooting one of these people because I'm going to prison. That's what I hear. I'm going to go to prison. Nobody's going to stand up for me. So let me, as we're closing in on the finish here, let me bring this focus back to the Bureau. I'll twist the knife a little bit. I mean, here, and this is as much rivalry as there is between CIA and FBI. I really don't mean this to be an attack on all FBI special agents at all, but as an agency, as a structure. These guys in recent years have somehow had the time and resources to surveil Carter Page, to apparently conduct surreptitious entries of his residence, to fly off to Rome, to London, to figure out how to entrap the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. All of this stuff, but they haven't apparently had time to penetrate an organization that is now setting the entire nation on fire. They apparently were completely blindsided by this entire insurrection that's ongoing. What's the solution? I mean, that's a grotesque failure. So, I mean, what are we talking about? We talk about replacing the FBI. God forbid, I hate to even think about a new organization. Are we talking about something that can be fixed internally if we get the politics out of it? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question, Sam. And the stakes of that question are unbelievably high because we're in a situation now where we have had a rupture of the public trust in law enforcement across the board, especially at the federal level. I mean, the people that I know a lot of agents. At one point in my career, I was assigned to do something directly with the Bureau. And having been a police officer, I worked with the FBI as a cop for 7 years. So I have an understanding a little bit about how their place works. But what has happened since the Trump administration mess occurred in the beginning is a rupture, and I believe a fatal rupture in the public trust. The Bureau has to take dramatic, visible steps to fix what's wrong over there. And I'm not saying this like we're coming from an agency that's perfect. The CIA is in desperate need of a total restructuring and course correction and a performance lift. But the Bureau is responsible for a different set of standards and issues here in the States. I think it is fixable, but it's going to require major surgery on the organization, and it's going to take a lot of time to repair the public trust rupture. And I believe that all of that is in the hands of the Attorney General right now, because the average person looks at what has come out and is now public about the conduct of senior officers, frontline supervisors. And make no mistake, it wasn't 27 people on the 7th floor of the FBI that did all of this. There were a lot of agents that knew about what was going on. They knew it was not right. They knew it was illegal in many aspects, I'm sure, and they'd said nothing. And that is a horrendous thing that has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed in the eyes of the public in the United States, because we entrust to them the two most important pieces of our liberty as citizens of the United States. We give the federal executive, and these guys are 1811 agents, so they're armed federal officers who have the power of arrest and the power to use lethal force on the citizens of the country. And I look at those two pieces of the public trust that we just give to the federal government and trust that they will do this right is ruptured. And it's a festering wound now. The bread and butter of the Bureau is to knock on doors, cred people, and talk to them. Just talk to people.
Right.
I know a lot of people who said, I'll never talk to an FBI agent again. Never. To find out that they're changing 302s, weeks or months after an interview, it's like, whoa, that's unbelievable. That the agent that wrote the 302, his 302 is changed by another agent later to make the narrative look the way they want. That is, to me, that is a breathtaking development, and they just keep coming. So something has to happen over there, and I've got some ideas on how they should do that. Just some issues where they're stretched out so far, doing stuff overseas and all kinds of crap that they're doing that really isn't crime and intelligence work and country protection. And clearly we're missing that, because look at the last 6 days. Yep. There's no question something's wrong. Something is seriously wrong. The billions and billions of dollars is going to be spent on trying to fix this. We have to fix the federal executive. The intelligence community is all screwed up. In duplicative, the FBI is not doing things that they need to do. Clearly, this is one of them. They should be dealing with these domestic issues, these domestic terror threats. And, it doesn't require a change of law. It doesn't require some new organization. It just requires a leadership change and I think Attorney General Barr is the guy, because he's not unintimidated by all the noise. I remember him when he worked for Bush 41, when we did a lot of stuff that was done overseas that no one will ever know about, because it was done well, done legally, and extremely effective. And he was the boss at a time when a lot of stuff went on, because George Bush 41 was the former DCI, so he knew how to use the CIA. We need something like that today, where people and he does know what he's doing. He knows this process. He knows how the government needs to work. And I hope he changes it with a draconian hand and chops out the rot, chops it out publicly, charges people inside CIA and inside the Bureau and every other organization that did things that were not right, prosecutes them and imprisons them. That'll be the first step in repairing the public trust rupture. And if we don't do that, we can't continue to function the way we're functioning now. This will fly out of control, and eventually normal, good people are going to start shooting back. And then it's going to be hell to pay in the United States to put the cap back on this.
Yeah, well, that's well said, John. I read consume a huge amount of news myself, and obviously do a lot of writing and other stuff every day. And I was reading something, it was out of Washington State yesterday, and it was Snohomish County. So I think when most people think about Washington State, they think about Seattle and the coast and sort of California light. But you get up, go over the mountains and head to Eastern Washington. You're in a totally different world. And Snohomish County is in that area section of Snohomish County. There was a report that looters were basically coming to this town, and they were talking in this local news was talk about how 1,000 citizens showed up armed, and the sheriff was there. Now, when it was all done, nothing happened and no shots were fired. And it made me think, God bless these people because they're law-abiding Americans. They showed up. There was no violence. But it also made me think, well, it took me to where you just were with your comments, which is there is a lot of Americans that are right there. They're like, if you're not going to protect me and if you're not going to stand up to these people, well, I am. I will not watch my house burn or my business burn. I will start shooting people, and God forbid. I mean, that we go there where that's the solution in this country. I mean,
that's what scares me to death, Sam.
It does. I hear. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day. They started using the term civil war, which I hear with increasing frequency. And I said to him, I've seen a few wars. And there's nothing good about them, man. Not like we don't sometimes have to go to war, but basically, do you have any idea what you're talking about? How ugly this is? That can't be the answer. You can't go down that road. The answer can't be Americans killing other Americans. But back to, I think, where you really ended up, which is accountability. I mean, we have to have accountability. Somebody has to answer for what was done against the President of the United States over a course of years, and the abuses by the Bureau and by the CIA. And somebody has to answer for this grotesque intelligence failure, in my opinion. When you have an insurrection that rises up and sets every major city on fire, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation finds out about it when they begin to watch television, that's not acceptable. I mean, if I was Donald Trump, I would be, and I would assume he ought to be demanding some very direct answers. Excuse me, I just had to be taken down to the bunker under the White House because people are worried these guys are going to breach the perimeter of the White House. And nobody in this entire apparatus could give me warning. Nobody knew this was happening. Nobody. 17 intelligence agencies, hundreds of thousands of people, and not one of you guys could tell me that we're about to have a revolution? Really?
Yeah. In front of the most important piece of real estate in Washington, D.C.?
I mean, again, I'm laughing not because it's funny, but because it's so ludicrous. It is. Good God, what are you all getting paid for?
It is staggering, and that requires draconian action. There are times in the federal government, as with any job or position, where you have to do major surgery on it, and people need to be fired and held accountable in the eyes of the public. They need somebody to be able to, you've got to look, not that you should just roll out a head, but there's plenty of heads that should be lopped off in this. Do something. Do something to restore at least the perception that there is a modicum of adult supervision in Washington somewhere, because the American public has watched this evolve since the last election, and it is still going in the wrong direction. The media is feeding the wrong direction. The people on Capitol Hill, the supposed elected representatives, are in large measure totally silent and not even visible. I don't even know where they are. They probably have left Washington. And then those that do speak generally get on TV and make a fool of themselves because they're either out of step with what's really going on, or they just show that, I don't know what to say, but I want my face on TV because, there's an election this year. And it's just asinine. And the average person sees right through it and doesn't think that there's anyone with their hand on the steering wheel back in the East Coast.
Yeah, I think that's a very broad perception. All right, John, we're going to leave it there for today. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
I appreciate your time, Sam. Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you next time on Ground Truth.